Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Dudes and Beer podcast, now officially brought to you by podcastcadets.com. If you're a fan of podcasting like I am, want to start your own show or have a show that you already have that just needs a little help, stop on by podcastcadets.com today. Use the code DUDES20 on your way out the door, and you will save 20% off your whole purchase. They can help you with everything from marketing to design, everything in the world. Stop on by podcastcadet.com today. Use the code DUDES20 to get 20% off at checkout. Our guest tonight, I am so excited. We have researcher, lecturer, author James Keenan on the show this evening to talk about past civilizations and world-changing cataclysms. As we talk about so much on this show, we are not the only civilization to have graced the presence on this great marble flying through the sky, folks. There have been other civilizations in the past. There have been civilizations that we come up upon all the time where it's like, hey, wow, we heard about this. But the city of Troy comes to mind, where it was thought for so long that it was mythological, that it did not exist, but in the story, and come to find out Troy is real. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Civilizations that have come and gone in our past, what our links are to them, what we hold from them today, what past knowledge has been hidden from us, what kind of cataclysms has happened before that are cyclical that we may be looking at again. That's what we'll be talking about tonight with our good guest, James Keenan, author, lecturer, and researcher, right after this report from our in-house reporter, John Baum from Daily News Collective.
Sure. 5G means more devices at mega-fast speeds, low delays, and your personal files will instantly pop out of the cloud. But the 5G rollout is rife with so many issues threatening human health and civil liberties that it's simply easier for the Mockingbird media to sell you a stack of positives rather than address the mountain of negatives.
Self-driving cars, smart cities, fully connected homes, robots. This is the future, and it will be powered by 5G. 5G signals are powerful, but they don't reach as far. Making it work will require thousands, maybe even millions of mini cell phone towers pretty much everywhere you can imagine. Every lamppost, the side of every building, maybe even in every room of your home.
Self-driving cars, for example, require a continuous stream of data. The quicker that information is delivered to autonomous vehicles, the better and safer they can run.
For many analysts, this is just one example of how 5G could become the connective tissue for the Internet of Things, an industry that's set to grow threefold by 2025, linking and controlling not just robots, but also medical devices, industrial equipment, and agricultural machinery.
Meanwhile, the federal government just signs off on big tech's blank check. They will just deal with the repercussions later. Why not? Congress is so unaccountable. Liability is at an all-time joke level. Why not let a massive unknown potential health threat spread itself throughout every city and suburb across the United States?
The only way we have a deployable, secure 5G system is either with Nokia, Ericsson, Samsung, or some combination of them. American telecom companies are playing and will play a central role in the deployment of 5G, both in the United States and globally. But in terms of developing affordable and deployable equipment sets, we've got to work closely with trusted allies.
Coming to a street lamp near you, right? 300,000 of them are going to sprout up in the United States. And preliminary studies from National Toxicology Program looking at 2G and 3G look like it can possibly cause heart tumors and brain tumors in rats, not people, mind you, rats, but change cells in the brain and cause ringing in the ears. So we don't know the long-term health risks, and I'm not willing to take that off the table, especially since 5G is closer to you because it's faster and it's higher definition, but it doesn't travel as far. So I need to see longer-term studies on this.
Why is 5G a risk? 5G is ultra-high frequency and intensity, which is further compounded by the millimeter waves that don't travel through objects or as far as 4G or 3G. Add to that, more mini cell towers must be installed because the current cell towers can't accommodate 5G. As RadiationHealthRisks.com writes, it is estimated that they will need a mini cell tower every 2 to 8 houses. This will greatly increase our RF radiation exposure. All cell towers emit radio frequency radiation. This is what makes them dangerous. 5G can support up to 1 million devices per square kilometer, while 4G supports only up to 100,000 devices per square kilometer. With RF radiation, how close the source is to our physical bodies is more important than the power level or wattage of the radiation. RF radiation dissipates with distance. In other words, a low-powered exposure right next to someone is more dangerous than a more powerful exposure a long ways away. Also, the longer the exposure time is, the more dangerous it is. 5G will be the worst of both worlds. We will have more sources around us and closer to us, and there will be more powerful and continuous emissions. One solution: you can invest in a Wi-Fi router guard. A Wi-Fi router guard will block between 90 and 95% of the RF radiation that your router emits. John Baum reporting.
Thank you so much, John Baum. Like I said in his episode where we were talking about Jeffrey Epstein, so much more to be heard from this year from John Baum. Not just his reports playing on here, but him as a guest coming on, talking about ongoing news stories, talking about what is going on in the news, what we may have missed, because, hey, if it's not your job to look at the news, folks, guess what? You're missing about half the news, if not more. On that note, speaking of news, things that you may have missed out on, if it's not your job to research ancient civilizations, to look at petroglyphs, to find these links between humanity through the ages, you may have missed some too. Our guest this evening is the amazing author, researcher, lecturer, James Keenan, coming on tonight to talk to us about ancient civilizations and the cataclysms that ended them. How are you doing this evening, James?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. I myself am waiting on one of your books to arrive from Amazon and cannot wait. You have numerous to your acclaim that are available in the Dudes and Beer store, everybody. But tell our audience a little bit about how you got into the research of ancient civilizations, petroglyphs, and catastrophes and cataclysms, because this is just such an interesting subfield that crosses so many genres of study.
Sure, absolutely. So I've always been pretty passionate about history. And, as you're listening to history and you hear all these legends being told, or you hear archaeologists and anthropologists always seem to tell you that what these past people did, it all only dealt with religion, and everything they talked about wasn't real. It was all made up, and it meant something else. And, growing up, I enjoyed history a lot, and it kind of pushed me towards anthropology and archaeology. So I majored in that in school. I got my degree in interdisciplinary studies with a major focus in anthropology and archaeology and Mesoamerican culture, which is really, I think, the area in this world, the Central and South America, but that central corridor of the Americas where so much has happened, and we've lost that knowledge of past cultures and past civilizations. And as I, did my excavation work, you come across some interesting things. Sometimes, I would run into something that shouldn't have been where it was. and it kind of, causes you to question what, your instructor and your professors have told you. And it just kind of suddenly got me thinking that, what I learned from my professors is exactly the same stuff that they learned from theirs that was passed on from, the professor before that. And it's just this old knowledge from the late 1700s and early 1800s that have just been funneled down up until present day. And I got to a point where I felt that the stories that have been told in these legends, there had to be more to it, and I realized that every story or legend has a core of truth, and I just want to know and wanted to find out what that truth was. And that led me to really start looking into very ancient past times. I'm more focused in before Common Era, and these unknown cultures that we've named just based off of a very few artifacts that we found from them. We really don't understand quite what Anasazi are, or Fremont, or Barrier Canyon culture. We've just labeled these unknown groups of people from a few artifacts that have been found at sites that we believe they may have occupied.
Yeah. And and even going into, you mentioning the Anasazi, going into the Southwest here in America, areas like that, even a lot of what we're finding out now lines up a lot more with what the Native American cultures have said their entire oral history, as opposed to what we archaeologically have believed and scientifically believed. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, and again, you get this Western European, culture telling us what happened here in the Americas, and from, like you said, the Native Americans have been telling a different story, and we've continued to push the fact that, this is just legend, it's folklore, it's not real, it's made up to mean something else. Well, when you talk to the Native Americans, they tell you, no, what we're talking about is exactly what we mean. And I like to give people an example. When you see something and for the first time and you want to record that for future posterity, you draw it the way that you saw it. So when you look at a petroglyph and you see a lizard, what did they see? A lizard. You see a buck with huge antlers. Well, they saw a buck with huge antlers. So then suddenly you see these anthropomorphic creatures that don't quite look human. They look like something other. And then suddenly the anthropologist and archaeologist goes, that's spirit people that they have while they're under hallucinogenics. Or it has something to do with their religion, but it's not actually what's there. Well, what if the possibility is that it is there and it was something that they saw? Because these petroglyphs and pictographs took a long time to chisel into the rock, or to get the right pigment to create the colors needed for these pictographs to last for thousands of years. Why would they have taken the time out? And we're talking about a long time to make this, if it wasn't something that necessary and that huge of a deal to be copied down for future posterity to know and remember.
Well, and not just the fact that it takes so long to do something like that, but like you were saying, it's not like there's an adjoining wall of cave art that is abstract cave art or cubist cave art. Much like art as we know it started, it was much more like in the still life realm, things like that, before these other forms of art started coming along. So it was absolutely, how well can I represent exactly what I see before me?
Absolutely.
And that's the artistic challenge. And even for them, it would be the artistic challenge. The things that they painted were things that meant something to them. They were buffalo, they were horses, they were animals that they hunted or used to hunt, animals that they lived off of, animals that they even perhaps saw as deified in some way. And once again, it brings us back to the point of, if that's what they're painting and taking the time to paint, because, you got to kind of spend some time doing that. Anybody who paints will tell you it's not like just sketching on a piece of paper, They had to put dedicated time into doing this. And when you're a Stone Age society, there's a certain amount of food gathering and eating and things like that have to happen. You aren't necessarily spending all day being an artist, is what I'm trying to say. So the fact that they dedicated the time to this wouldn't mean to me that it would be an interpretation of something, but much more a record of what they saw.
Sure, and you got to remember too that when I'm looking at the rock art, I'm looking for specific time frames, and then you're looking for locations with the same symbols. And so when you're looking for that, you're looking for the full effect, meaning you're not looking at one symbol, but you want to look at all the symbols, all the petroglyphs in the rock art, everything around it in the big picture. And then you're narrowing down to these certain times where an event took place, or something was seen out of the ordinary and copied. And then, like you said, as time goes on, just like in our modern day culture, things that meant something very specific in particular can suddenly grow into, a form of art, or it can become where that symbol is now used as a design. But where were the origins from? And that's what I'm doing, is trying to attempt to locate the origin story, and that truth in the legend, pull that and get it out of the rock art and separate it, and then try to find out what the real reason was behind it being, put into stone or carved into an artifact for future generations. Well,
let's get into, you were mentioning the petroglyphs and rock art. Let's get into that just a little bit, James. What kind of things do you see moving from society to society across the globe that are similar?
Sure. So when I lecture about ancient anomalies pointing towards past worldwide catastrophic events, something took place on a global scale at a global level. And as these people looked up into the sky and captured what was happening, or they may not have survived it, and a few others did, and eventually it was written down or carved to let people know. But you're looking for certain symbols. And one of these is what's called the changing of the world, and it looks like an hourglass symbol. And you see it at certain time frames in the artwork. And when you look at it, there seems to be catastrophic events being captured around this hourglass symbol. In the Americas, in the East Coast, this hourglass has been almost tossed into additional petroglyphs that show chaos taking place and this huge deluge happening and people being washed away and animals being crushed together. And as you go from the Americas to Europe, to Siberia, you see this same thing happening. You see this changing of the world symbol with chaos taking place. And it always seems to be capturing either a deluge or something coming down from the sky that's causing, chaos and death to follow. And then you have these other symbols, which is a plasma tree. And originally, anthropologists and archaeologists will try to attempt to tell you that it's a tree or that some of them may be stalks of corn. But when you look at and date it, and you look at the full rock art, this looks to be a plasma event taking place in the sky that, again, caused, death and destruction. Plasma, as we know, is hot ionized gas. And if there was enough of it for this event to be seen around the world and to be captured in all locations, it had to be catastrophic. It caused more than likely a loss, probably about 99% of the population at the time, with the 1% or less that survived it more than likely having to go underground. And that's when you start locating these underground huge cities in Turkey, like they're in Kuyu, that looked like they could have housed 20 to 50,000 people.
Yeah, like literally small cities carved into the earth.
Yeah, 13 stories down. That obviously took a long amount of time, and it was done over a very long time because what took place above ground took a long time for it to dissipate and for the world to return to the point where humans could come back up out of the ground. And then you're getting these legends again of the underworld because of this, that people were forced into the underworld due to fire and, hellfire and brimstone. Well, what exactly is hellfire and brimstone? What exactly is the underworld? Why is it that finally the hero always seems to ascend out of the underworld? It's just a matter of looking into and locating and understanding the origin and realizing that there's always truth in that legend, that fairy tale.
Yeah, there's always a nugget of truth. Always, folks. And with that in mind, I want to play a news report real quick because it's been on the lips of numerous people. I've, of course, posted articles about it in the past on the Dudes and Beer Facebook group. But here in the last couple years, there's been a lot of hubbub about the Antarctic, and specifically about pyramids being seen on Google Earth in the Antarctic. And I have this quick little news report that kind of goes into it a little bit, and then we can talk about some of the storied history of the Antarctic, and what some of that may actually mean.
Tonight's Fact or Fiction, we're looking into an image from Google Earth. It's getting some buzz. It shows an area of Antarctica that some people claim clearly has pyramids covered in snow. Several websites say the pyramids were likely made by an intelligent human civilization long ago. It's pure fiction. The so-called pyramids in the Google Earth image are just mountains. Their pyramid-like shape is called a horn, and these type of mountains are a common feature of areas with glaciers. There's no evidence the humans ever lived on Antarctica, let alone build pyramids there.
Note, humans. That's one of the key words to consider. But in addition to that, it's interesting for them to go into it, for them to even give credence to the story. Like I said, it came across BBC Science, all kinds of stuff. But there has been a long-standing story of Admiral Byrd and the Arctic explorations done not only by him, but by Operation High Jump shortly after World War II, going down to search for Nazi bases, things like that. And apparently they came back limping. There were no Nazis found, but the naval forces that went with Admiral Byrd came back with a considerable limp, let's just say. And it's interesting to me how eyes have once again turned back to the Antarctic. Let's get into some of the stories of past catastrophes, past cataclysms, because, of course, the Antarctic was not always frozen. The event that you talk about sounds very similar to me, kind of like a massive X-ray plus class solar flare, or perhaps even a nuclear explosion. And when you go back and read the Bhagavad Gita, things like that from ancient India and Hindu texts, it goes considerably into technology that sounds very much like nuclear weapons being used, things like that. And there have been no less than 5 major mass extinction events in the history of the planet as we know it, much less minor things like what we're talking about that may be the flood of Noah, which oddly enough correlates almost all over the globe. So let's get into a few of these real quick, starting with, I guess, Antarctica, things like that.
Yeah, sure. So as I've done my research, I've come to the conclusion that 4 catastrophic events took place that I'm capable of showing evidence that it very well could have taken place. One is a major solar outburst. 2 is Venus. Some way, shape, or form, Venus did something to planet Earth. The other, as a Native American state, was what looked to be a blue star coming out of the center of the galaxy. And what it more than likely was some type of massive explosion that pushed cosmic dust and gamma radiation with it. And the Earth was embellished in this. And then another one is a nuclear type explosion that happened inside our planet from when the inner core leaked to the outer core and caused basically a nuclear explosion. And when that took place, you got to think that the rotation of the Earth for several hours was changed.
Sure.
And if that happens, you're talking about wind speed of 1,034 miles per hour, because the wind isn't going to stop, and neither is the water. It's still going to go from west to east. And we see around the world all these animals crushed together, humans crushed together. Their bones have come together as one, especially in these Arctic regions, in Alaska, Siberia. We have seen this happen. And you have to also realize that those winds are going to help push, tsunamis across the land, the dry land.
Yeah.
And in Antarctica, you have to think about the fact that currently there's a pole shift taking place. The Native Americans have come to the United Nations recently and have said, look, the sun is taking longer to set, longer than it has been. It's up for an extra hour, and nobody wants to hear it, and they don't want to press that because they don't want to worry the public. And you got to look. Recently, they had to change magnetic north years before they're supposed to, because the magnetic poles are shifting.
I
like
actively
not seen.
in the promo post, like I told you, I always put article links, things like that, so that people don't think I'm a crazy person with what I'm talking about in my show. It sounds like science fiction to be like, nope, and we know that there's like a small drift here and there, like if you go up to polar north, there are like little capstones that they put out every year to mark the position. Here's the thing, folks. They haven't been able to do that in a while. Here's the article from dailymail.com. Earth's magnetic north is shifting at an unprecedented rate of 30 miles a year. 30 miles a year. That's like 4 days ago. 4 days ago. Like, that is humming along if you're talking 30 miles a year. That means that it's moving at about a quarter mile a day. That's just wild to think about. And when you start looking at magma core samples from lava flows, things like that, and you start looking at the iron filings and the magnetite, you can see where there's typically a flip of the pole of the Earth, where this magnetite, which is iron that's been fixed magnetically whenever it cools rapidly, and it's then aligned to magnetic north, and you can see where the north and south pole have actively flipped on their axis, and that hadn't happened for a little while. Talking about cataclysms that are repetitive, things that are cyclical for us. Solar cycles are cyclical for us. Right now we're in one of the quietest cycles seen in who knows how long. And we have seas boiling with methane. We have earthquakes popping up in clusters all over the Pacific. Yes, absolutely, there is some pollution coming from mankind, people. I'm not a climate change denier. But good Lord, there is a wild solar cycle going on in the entire solar system right now as well. And for me, to know that this stuff was known by ancient civilizations like the Mayans, that it was recorded by them, that they made calendars specifically about these cataclysms. Go into that a little bit for us, James.
Sure, absolutely. And you know, too, like you were saying to the audience, you know, is the shift in the Earth's core with this magnetic pole shift causing a change in our solar axis tilt? And that was kind of where I was going. Yeah. Because you got to think what'll happen when the magnetic pole shift to near the equator during a magnetic pole flip. You know, it's going to change the precession, the precession of, you know, how we're moving, how we're turning, based upon the torque, which is our gravitational, you know, influence of other bodies. Sure. You know, what's going to happen? And think about it. The Antarctica may not have always been where it is currently. It didn't always have ice on it. Where was it located? And what was the old South Pole area? And do we have the timetable correct? And then this goes into what you were talking about with the Maya. The Maya had several calendars, and one of these calendars was a 52-year calendar. And on their cylinder, the cyclical circle calendar, it deals almost completely with the planet Venus. The Maya were so worried about Venus that they followed it all the time. They watched it all the time. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why were they so worried about what was, you know, happening with this planet, which is almost, you know, we could consider it a sister planet. It's almost identical in size. And it was a 52-year calendar. And on that day, when of the 52nd year, the Maya were in this panic mode. They were terrified, horrified. They thought the world was going to end on that 52nd year. And if they made it through the day, they gave celebration to their gods. They even sacrificed, had human sacrifices, because they were so grateful to still be alive. So what took place in the past that was the cause of all this fear, the cause of having to monitor this planet to the point where they built observatories that can be seen in such places as Chichen Itza that look just like the observatories we have today? You know, that technology existed 1,000 years ago. How? You know, people go, oh, the Maya didn't have the wheel. You know what? They sure did. You can see it on a lot of the artifacts that are in the Mexico City, the National Museum of Anthropology. The wheel was there. We don't give them enough credit. And you have to think all those codices and all those scrolls and texts that they had that were destroyed by Father Landry and the Spaniards when they came over.
Yeah.
What did they have in them? What was in those? What knowledge did we lose because of, religious zealots wiping out an entire culture?
Absolutely. And, just before show, I was bringing up a point that I bring up regularly on the show, folks. Like, don't forget, literally, it was actually 1522. 1522 was when Magellan returned from his 3-year voyage with only 18 crew members left. Like, started off with 200, came back with 18 3 years later. But that was the first circumnavigation of the globe. Until then, any concept that the Earth was round, like, sure, there was the Pythagorean theorem and the Greeks, but it was never proven. That was just like, hey, yeah, I think the Earth might be a sphere. Until then, like, even until after Magellan, you could be hung, tied, drawn and quartered, burned at the stake, excommunicated, all kinds of horrible things for saying the Earth is round. It was open-minded and open-hearted conversation from people who said, I think I have a different set of facts that actually made the Earth be round, finally. And now we somehow make fun of people for thinking that the Earth is flat. It was actually much more of our thinking and writing history that we thought that it was flat than we thought that it was round, people. And I think it's very haughty of scientists to say that we have it figured out when we discover new civilizations all the time. We discovered buried cities all the time. We regularly discover new species, discover species that we thought were extinct that we see in the wild again. I think it's very ostentatious for us to say that, not that the Egyptians couldn't build the pyramids, but that they didn't build the pyramids. I think it gives them a lot of discredit. Because, yes, they were smart enough to build the pyramids. Were they inspired by something to build the pyramids? Most definitely. Were the pyramids used for something that was not burial sites? Yes, absolutely. All evidence points to that. But how they were built, that's part of the lost knowledge that we're talking about. That's part of this lost history of mankind that we don't know. We don't know how the pyramids were built in any of these countries. And they are all pretty well like pre-written history situations. Now, coming back to petroglyphs, art forms, things like that, real quick, James, what kind of stuff do you see, like you were saying, the hourglass shape? What kind of teachings about origins do you see that stretch across the globe, culture to culture, people that technically shouldn't have been talking?
Well, it seems that when you're talking about origin and you're talking about multiple cultures, in some way, shape, or form, you hear words such as star people, little people, otherworldly, and we laugh at them like they don't know what they're talking about. They don't have the science or technology, and we really have to stop. And like you were saying, scientists say science is the only way. However, the science of 100 years ago is obsolete today. And we look back and it's archaic. So where are we going to be in 100 years? In 100 years, they're going to look back at the year 2019 and laugh at, what we consider to be fact.
Yeah.
And scientists forget one very important thing, is that they're constantly testing and trying to disprove the current hypothesis. That's what science is about, is to continue to test, continue to seek out a new way, the right way out of what's the potential of it being wrong. And unfortunately, it's become a business. Even science has become a business. And individuals are writing papers, and they're getting it published, and they're getting this fame, and they're being compensated monetarily for it. And they don't want to be proven wrong, because it's going to take away from all of that. And just like gasoline has stopped us from making so many advances that we could have in vehicles, it's the same thing in history. We've shut down historical knowledge and data because it would keep people from being paid. And we're getting to a point now where we're getting a bit more open-minded, and you're having things like the government itself start talking about things such as UAPs and allowing for military pilots, to come forward and tell them, hey, we saw this happen, and document it now. So, the walls are starting to break down, and it's obviously going to still take a lot of time, but I feel that we are going to come to a point where we're going to learn a lot more about our past and these lost cultures, these lost civilizations. We're going to find out what these megalithic structures were for. And I know you and I were talking a little bit, and I was telling you that, I believe that what we have today, like the pyramid in Giza, is just a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And the technology and the main use of it was lost during this time frame. And, it's just a matter of time for things to start happening. And I think we're at that precipice point where we're starting to come towards the horizon, and hopefully we'll be able to start looking over and seeing things in a different light, and hopefully start, having more funding into research and having new, theories or hypotheses about what's going on and happening, and allowing for different types of evidence to exist, at the university level, to make its way onto, television, into the radio, to talk about it. It's happening. It's just a very, very slow process.
And we were discussing that before the show, actually, the fact that these things are finally starting to hit the eye of major media. They're finally starting to be seen as viable. And it's once again, like I said, because we regularly find, like, oh, look, here's this animal that we thought was extinct and was gone, and it hadn't been seen for 30 years, and now it's back. And when those things start being overturned, when we start seeing that, it's okay to start questioning. And I think that when science stops questioning and considers something concrete, we've got a problem. Like, that's when we truly scientifically have a problem, is when science considers something just absolute. Because once again, what was alchemy in the 1500s, 1600s now is science. And what is magic to us now, what we consider to be absolute magic, will be child's play for our children's children. And it's just the way that technology moves, and the way that technology moves through culture. And I say culture to leave humanity out of it. I would venture to say that any species that experience technology, much like I was saying, art, it begins with an everyday representation. It begins with, let me create what I have seen that struck me. from my imagination or from the representation physically there. And then it goes into the abstract later. It goes into the interpretive at a later point. But when you start breaking that down and you really start looking at how we as people have evolved, how society has evolved, I don't doubt one bit that, like I was saying earlier, that we had the capability to do this stuff. Where that technology went, it's a pretty. I'm trying to have the guy who wrote Giza Power Plant on the show. I'm in the midst of contacting him right now, but even that theory, the fact that it was used to produce power, pretty sound, pretty decently thought out, and to know that there may have been civilization on Antarctica, whether it built pyramids or not, we don't know, but there's definitely been bones found. There's definitely been people that have been there. So when you start talking about the stories of Admiral Byrd and the Arctic missions and Hollow Earth and how, that's just crazy sauce. Well, not really. Ancient societies have been talking about people living in the earth for thousands of years.
Yeah, to your point, you got to remember that almost everything, that's not made of stone or rock disintegrates after a certain time frame. And you're talking about even the largest of skyscrapers would no longer be observable in 10,000 years. And then you add on a deluge with salt water, and you speed up the process. Then you add massive amounts of heat, like plasma, this hot ionized gas enveloping the, above the crust. You're talking about, so when people go, well, where's the proof if these were huge, civilizations that existed and they were far more advanced? Well, you're thinking in a small frame of mind in a small period of time, and you have to think that thousands of years have gone by.
Yeah.
And, obviously there's going to be some anomalies that can survive, like a stainless steel sink. And those are the anomalies we're coming across today, like these huge stone balls in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Again, it's made of stone, so it survived. But how was it made? What was it, used for? We've lost this knowledge. And obviously catastrophic events have taken place that have caused us to have this amnesia in historical data. And you said it again, what you were talking about in Middle Earth. Well, think about where humans had to go to survive. It had to be underground. And then you get these origin stories, or you get these stories of the underworld, where man goes to fight whatever it is underground to survive, and it's hellfire and brimstone. Well, again, we're talking about some form of truth in that legend. And then at some point, man survives and comes up out of the underworld to reclaim, the land. Well, boy, that sure sounds like a catastrophic event that eventually was survived by our great ancestor.
Yeah.
And, a few people finally turned into 7+ billion humans again on the planet.
Yeah, precisely. And, when you start looking at the calendars and the stories of people like civilizations like the Maya, who did follow the solar cycle and were aware of things like solar flares, stuff like that. It does make sense. It does kind of start piecing some things together as far as where civilizations may have gone, what happened to them. What are some of the things that you have come across in your research, James, that have just kind of set you aback, that whenever you see them, just change your perspective a little bit?
Sure. So, like I said, I focus a lot or mostly in Mesoamerican location, Mesoamerican culture, Mesoamerican civilization. So we're talking mostly, a lot of my work or my research takes place in Mexico. And we're talking about the Maya, the Olmec, the Proto Olmec, that there was a culture and a civilization that we're not quite sure who they were, so we're going to label them Proto Olmec. And you start finding these artifacts. And an example, when I was excavating in the Yucatan, I came across an artifact that was about a little less than a meter below the virgin ground of a site. And how could this object, this artifact, be almost a meter below where everything else was found? And then to look at the object I found, and for it to be this anthropomorphic face that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't look human. Looks somewhat human, but it sure is pointing or leading towards other. And when I say other, today's modern day, when you look around in our culture, it points towards the possibility of there being other races, other species that we contact. And some of these artifacts have the potential of looking like that. But we'll label it anthropomorphic at this time. However, how it got to that depth and what it resembles or is supposed to entail and discuss is unknown. And it's very interesting. Now you go to places like the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. You walk around for a little while. You look at the artifacts. Well, there are a ton of facial artifacts that definitely are not Mayan. They're not Native American. They sure look like they could be from African races. You have some that look like the jinn, like Persian people.
Yeah.
And they're labeled as Olmec. Well, that's got to make you think, who are the Olmec? Where did they originate from? Has the world been traveled far more than we're led to believe and told? And you have to remember, too, that a lot of history, a lot of people's reputations, monetary needs, all come into play to keep the story the way it is, to keep the masses lulled into a belief that this is the way it is and there's no other way it could have been.
Oh,
people
got grants out for hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars for research on stuff that, goes along with the given narrative. That's really the only way to put it. Whenever you say follow the money, I mean, it sounds evil to say about science, people. Believe me, I know. Like, we say it all the time about the government, but we also talk on this show about the religion of science and the danger of that. And when we say religion of science, it's like we were saying, the fact that, no, the earth is flat, the earth is flat, the earth is flat. Well, there were a lot of people saying it was round, except for the people that were in charge of what was to be said.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what James is saying here, is that there are people with vested interests. There are people who have made their entire letters on the back of their name off research that is contrary to what we're saying. What happens to their research? What happens to their findings, their writings? What happens when we said that, people got here via a land bridge after the last ice age, but yet still we find like 12,000-year-old fire pits up in Pennsylvania with tools and pottery around them, and like that predates the last ice age, but even though this stuff is out there and articles are written about it, it's kind of pushed to the side rapidly, and it's not really focused on. And it's sad to me to see the fact that even science has come to the point of once again brushing things aside to make sure that things are easily understood instead of fully understood.
Yep, and the biggest culprit of that is the Smithsonian.
Well, get into that for just a second or two. We have about 5 minutes. I would like to keep talking with you. We have about 5 minutes left for our audience in the Hudson Valley on WMLD, and we will continue the conversation for those live with us this evening on Facebook, on our app, on our website, and for all of the listeners.
Sure, absolutely. So I currently live in Arizona, in the Southwest. Back in the early 1900s, there was a cave located in the Grand Canyon. There was an article written about it in the newspaper that there were Egyptian relics and statues and possibly even from other places like possibly Persia or India mixed in. And the person that found this was, going down the river. He notified people. He found it. Suddenly the Smithsonian, comes in. They cordon it off and they're doing their research. Things are moved. And when asked, hey, what about everything that was in this cave, all these Egyptian relics and artifacts? Their answer is, what are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you're crazy. You're
right.
Crazy.
And check this out. That location, everything in the entire area is named after Egyptian names or Egyptian gods. Yeah. You're talking about the hills, the mountain, the passes. They all were given Egyptian names, all of this. And now even to add and make it, the plot thickens, it's illegal to go into this area. You're not allowed in there. And the Forestry Service, they'll stop you and they'll arrest you. It's off limits. Why? Why is it off limits? Well, they have no clue. It's just off limits, and it's against the law to be in this location. Yeah, you can go climb anywhere else in the area, but you ain't climbing there. Absolutely. And they, whatever it takes to keep the current knowledge flowing the way that we were taught in school is what we're being fed and what we're having to do. It's, you don't want to tip the boat. There's just too much at stake, too much involved, in regards to, not just the history, but the people that the history would affect, all the way up to religion. Absolutely. If things were changed. Yeah. And with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye to our audience in the Hudson Valley. Happy holidays, you guys. Thank you so much, James. Please, we're going to continue this conversation. If you're in the Hudson Valley, you like what you're hearing, stop on by dudesandbeer.com. Check out the whole episode with James Keenan. And James, with that in mind, talking about the Smithsonian, the trick, because that's one of my favorite ones to point out to people. Not everybody knows that dirty little secret in history happened. And it was early in the Smithsonian's career when they first started collecting things across the country. And this is a lot of the basis of the movie National Treasure. Things like that, or I guess really more National Treasure 2, where they go and, but it's wild how these are things that even if you look at there's a story of the Ark of the Covenant making its way over, and there are Jewish symbols found out in the Southwest. So the fact that these cultures may have met, the fact that these societies have traveled the world, is mind-blowing to me. There's another one. Look at the red-headed cannibalistic giants. You're here in the Southwest. You come across the Navajo. Those in the Navajo Nation, and it's in their petroglyphs. It shows these giants, but those remains were taken again by the Smithsonian and supposedly lost or put away, and they don't know what you're talking about. Well, you talk to the Paiute, in Utah and Nevada, and they'll tell you absolutely they were the Siteka, the red-headed cannibal giants. The Paiute were at war with them because they would kill and eat the Paiute. So they had to hunt them down to stop this from happening. They named them. They have them in the petroglyphs everywhere through the Southwest. The Native Americans talk, as if it were nothing. It's common knowledge to them. But for our Western culture, it's hidden and kept from us. And it goes again, back to Big Brother, They're making that call on what we should be aware of and what we should know. It's not in our history books in elementary school, not in high school, not in college. Therefore, it's not necessary. We shouldn't know about it, and it's covered up.
Yeah, and it seems to be so regular now that we see these things. Like I said, if you are not a follower of news, number one, become a follower of news, folks. RSS feeds are your best friend. Get yourself an RSS feed reader and follow the RSS feeds of all the news that you like. But if you aren't seeing these things regularly, it's something to be worried about. And when you start seeing the fact, like James is saying, that the government is talking more and more about UAVs. They're talking more about, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and in a serious way, in a way that is not a conspiracy theory type aspect, but what are we going to do? There are things that we don't know how to handle going on. The sad thing is that science is not following necessarily the same protocol as the government when it comes to this stuff. They aren't necessarily saying like, hey, let's see what we can find out about this. A lot of them are just kind of pushing the research to the side. Where have you seen that taking place the most here lately in the field, James?
It's everywhere. You even see things like Göbekli Tepe, and they're finally, I think they're almost being forced to backdate at least to 13,000 years ago, history because of this site. But what's not coming out is were all these circles, dug out and created? And what was the reason for them? And if you really look at something, and I think Dr. Bruce Cornett brought this to my attention, that they were tracking the stars, and apparently the precession was not where it is today. And we were moving at such a speed and pace that as the stars changed, they ran out of space. They had to dig another circle. That they're not these religious pits. They have actual meaning for people to survive. And finally, as the precession of the planet got to around where it was about 6,000 years ago, guess what? We were finally able to start farming and have proper crop setting because the seasons finally took effect as we have them today. And this knowledge is just being hidden. And it almost seems that this lost history, these megalithic structures, ufology, these UAPs that we're now hearing about, they all seem to be connected some way, shape, or form. You start seeing technology that the government is testing or that suddenly they have. And you got to kind of, scratch your head and be, where did it even originate from? Are the possibilities that it was already here and it was just rediscovered and then just kept from the public a good possibility? And I would have to say yes. So I think we're seeing it, to answer your question, in all different areas. the hidden knowledge, whether it be in science, whether it be in technology, whether it be in history, it all seems to be combined. At some point, it seems like it's overlapping. And it's a matter of time, I think, to where we as the public finally get sick and tired of allowing them, because we've become so complacent with our government telling us what to do, that I think as a larger collective, we've quit asking questions, and they've kind of, thrown us off and changed direction through the regular media. It's just this outlet that's controlled by them. They make you watch just stupid stuff.
My God, it's like you listen to this show, James.
Yeah, you focus in on these these shows where it's about people's lives, and people quit living their own life, and that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to not question authority, and we've gotten so good at just nodding our head up and down. And you go to the schools and they have the kids walking in formation, being quiet, don't question the teacher, don't question what's in the book. And that follows from a very young age right up to, guess what, we're watching this regular news or this, and then they have us fighting between political parties because that keeps your eye off the ball. And we're not suddenly looking around or looking up into the sky. You know what? If this North Pole keeps moving and suddenly GPS went down, people wouldn't know what to do.
30 miles a year, man. 30 miles a year. That's just mind-numbing to think about. And when you start thinking about, that's exactly what the sub-headline was. The byline to that headline was, scientists don't know what to do about GPS coordinates.
Yeah.
That they're having to rewrite them constantly. And you want to know what's messed up with your Google Maps, folks? It's not that they did. It's not that they didn't come by and grab all the local IP addresses and map it all out right. They did. It's just that the GPS is so jacked up because of the North Pole shifting the way it is. It can't keep track of everything. It's wild. Like, how many catastrophes like this? Of course, we know about the global flood that happened more than likely up around the time of Moses, things like that. It was recorded by numerous cultures. From the Mayans spoke about it, the Hindus spoke about it, Middle Eastern, even Americans spoke about it. But what are some of the other great catastrophes that are cyclical that have befallen mankind in the past that, maybe we're just kind of looking over?
Sure, absolutely. And, and first, just a great point, like you said, when you're talking about cyclical, you're talking about, and you got to think about it, we're on planet Earth, we're in this solar system of the sun, we're in the Milky Way galaxy. Well, a lot of people don't realize that our solar system is traveling through the galaxy in like this corkscrew rotation. And as we're traveling at this great speed in our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy is traveling at an even greater speed through the universe. And at certain locations, we're coming in contact with something. What it is, your guess is as good as mine. The historical data shows the possibility of multiple events, like I named a few, the solar outburst, Venus, this blue star, which more than likely is some type of explosion. There could be cosmic gases, ionized gases. We could come in contact with planets that we don't even know exist in our own solar system, because our solar system is huge. People can't, I think, quite comprehend just how far out our sun's reach goes. And you talked about the deluge with Noah, and Noah was named a different person with the Sumerians.
Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh, exactly. And So names are changed, but the story is the same. It was this great deluge. Well, think about this, and a lot of people don't realize it. If you read the first few chapters of the Bible in Genesis, guess what? The Adam and Eve story is a separate catastrophic event that took place.
Yeah.
And that was probably at around 12,500 to 13,000 years ago. And then suddenly you're thrown into, Noah and his catastrophic event. But what caused the deluge? There's a few possibilities. And if you look at the cultures in the Americas, it seems to be a possibility that something happened to Venus, or Venus had an effect on planet Earth. And there's multiple possibilities as to what they could be from looking at the petroglyphs, looking at what's on the artifacts, and keeping an open mind as to what the symbolism entails, or what the glyphs, the hieroglyphs actually mean. And what people fail to realize again is, like Zechariah Sitchin read the Sumerian clay tablets differently than what the scholars did. Who's right? I don't know. But a lot of people don't realize that when we now say, we know about 80% of what Mayan glyphs mean, well, guess where that came from? A lot of that came from them, the ethnologists, the anthropologists, going to the current Maya, and asking them, hey, what does this mean, and what does that mean? Well, what if that vocabulary and the wording and the meanings changed over time, just like English in just such a short amount of time from 400 years ago changed to what it is today?
Yeah.
So there's a good possibility that and the anthropologists are telling you this is what it means, and it can mean nothing else. It has to mean this, and you're not allowed to change it.
Yeah.
Well, they're social scientists. It's just a social science. It's meant to change. It's meant to evolve. And the meaning can be completely different than what they're telling you it is today.
Yeah. Well,
and people listen to the TV. They listen to these people and think that they're the gods of knowledge, the gods of their departments, and that they can't be wrong. Well, guess what? They're not always right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And proven time and time again to not always be right. And you got to be willing to not be right. You got to be willing to question that status quo. You got to be willing to question even your own paradigm, even the way that you think, everybody. And with that in mind, actually, Del Miller, one of our listeners, chimed in and was saying, because we are not encouraging a hypothetical mindset, we are creating a laziness in our culture of people who just soak up everything, or who soak everything up and have no interest in the process of search and discovery and research, because that's work. And he asks, what can we do to reignite a passion to research and discover things in these fields?
For me, and this is what I started doing, and I'm glad he actually asked that. My last book I wrote, even though it's fictional, it's a children's 4th and 5th grade AR reading book. And what I did...
That's why I got it.
Yeah, what I did was I wanted to introduce ufology, the jargon, the history behind it, the technology behind it to kids. Because when I wrote this, I would go and substitute teach so that I could get to know my readers. And I'm currently also writing the second part of that book, so I'm substitute teaching again the 4th and 5th grade most of the time to get their input. And when you go to these schools, the teachers are so closed off to anything other than what's in the book. And I understand that they have to do that. But I think to answer his question is we got to start at an early age, re-educating and building this passion up with younger generations that experimenting, questioning, going out and finding the answer on your own, or seeing if what you think is the answer is actually correct.
Yeah.
Getting them out, getting them past their cell phones, getting them past the television and out the door is probably the best way to do that. Like I said, if GPS goes down, I don't think anybody would know where to get anywhere, because they're so focused on listening to, some voice tell you turn left or turn right in 100 feet. Well, what happens, if technology goes down, if electricity is lost? I may be one of the few people that can be dropped out in the middle of nowhere and use a compass to find my way back and make the corrections for magnetic north currently.
Yeah, I mean, I actively said probably about 10 episodes ago when we had a guy on, Mark Marchand, who owns a heritage broom making company. Like, his kids like making brooms with him. Get that. They're like teenagers, and they're like making brooms for competitions. And I was like, my plan is that as a Cajun, if I can't drop my kid off at 9 years old, like a Spartan in the age of Sparta, and just go, okay, kid, I'll see you in a year, and he comes back with the wolf pelt around him, like, I haven't done my job. He will know his cardinal directions. He will know how to be able to find his way through. And it's literally the fact that we have to be willing to teach them. We have to be willing to let them know it's okay to question. And if you don't know, tell them, I don't know. Let's go find out together.
Exactly.
Let's go find out. Like, I'm just excited to know now as you are. Don't make it a point of shame that you don't know, Dad or Mom. It's okay that you don't know. They don't know either. That's how you find out. You have to be willing to explore. You have to be willing to question the status quo. And it's, for me, it's the fact of, if you're not questioning, are you growing? Are you growing as an individual? Even if you aren't questioning the paradigm in which you live or think, are you growing as an individual? Through your research, James, what normally happens to a stagnant society? Can they create their own catastrophe by not being involved, by not exploring, by being too insular, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. I think at that point, just any movement forward is halted for whatever reason. And you obviously, you see that in some of the past cultures where they went extinct, and it was because of knowledge being lost, or we overproduced, maybe it was population or something, and the fact that we lost or forgot about certain ideas or certain abilities or capabilities caused a decline or a complete loss of cultures or civilizations. And I know a lot of times, it's probably good to make that culture denotes that, the manifestation or manner for which groups think and behave and act. That's what I mean by culture. And when I'm talking about civilization, I'm talking about that process of human development and organization that creates religion and art and dance and literature and customs and morals. Yeah. It's that developments, and that's that difference between culture and civilization, and one or both can be lost.
Yeah, and that's the danger, quite honestly. More than the loss of life, it's the loss of culture. It's the loss of cultural knowledge. It's the loss of what we as a society remember and recall. And that is so easily lost. That is so rapidly lost. One of the guests that we're getting ready to have back on is futurist Gray Scott. And if you haven't checked him out, he's in a lot of Discovery Channel, History Channel documentaries about transhumanism, futurism, things like that. And one of my favorite things that he said was that the human brain societally remembers at about a 7 to 8 year range with good detail. Beyond that, details kind of start fading. And when you start thinking about that, when you start thinking about the media machine today, when you start thinking about the political machine that's in place, most countries around the world, yeah, it's right up around that swing cycle of 7 to 8 years, you know? And it's a struggle for us as people to get past that. And it's got to be a struggle for us as a society as a whole, much less as an American society or a British society or a Chinese society, what have you, trying to maintain a cultural identity, but to maintain a humanity identity, to try and maintain this and keep that concept going for future generations is so hard. It's so entirely hard for it not to get lost in that 8 year cycle of mentality, you know? And
yeah, absolutely.
For cultures like the Maya, there's a reason why these things were entrenched parts of their culture, why these cycles were entrenched parts of their religion, entrenched parts of their culture, their planting, everything. Because that's how you don't forget it. When we start stepping away from that, when we start stepping away from the fact that we need these things, we need the knowledge of this in order to properly survive, I think that's when we start becoming our own self-fulfilling prophecy. That's literally where I think Carlos Cedillo, our Mayan prophet expert, would come in and say that that's exactly what the Mayan prophecy of 2012 was talking about. It wasn't talking about the end of the world. It was talking about the end of knowledge and life as we know it. The birth of something new, the birth of a new way of thinking. We were entering into the nighttime, the application of this knowledge. The time of dawning of this knowledge was over. Now it's time for the application. And we're starting to see some pretty interesting things cyclically going on now. And when you start looking at that, that's where you can start seeing that kind of philosophic downfall once again of a society coming about. Like we were saying, the self-fulfilling catastrophe. Now, what would you say as far as catastrophes and societies go, James? What should we be looking for right now in the cycles in which we're living, in the world in which we're living, to be echoed from these previous catastrophes into modern day?
You know, and it's funny because you kind of touched upon, I have a book, the second part or second half of Dark Shadows and Catastrophe is a date. It's 10/22/2036. And what I'm trying to show in that book is the potential that the Mayan date of December, of 2012 may not have been correct, not because the Mayans were wrong, but because our scientists incorrectly converted it over.
Oh.
And that if you read the correct symbolism on the three calendars, that there's potential that this cyclical event is on the horizon. It hasn't passed from a physical standpoint of catastrophe, the actual event taking place. And that there's a need for us to maybe question where we're getting our information and who is giving us our information. And I can understand why they wouldn't want to press that, because what could we really do as an individual or as a people if we're talking about something that's going to happen to our planet from outside of this planet, and we don't have an ability to change that? Are we better off not knowing when that time or place is going to happen, because there's so many more of us now than there were in the Mayan civilization that existed?
Yeah.
And they had a plan. They had a plan to go back underground. Maybe those that are in power right now and very rich have that same plan. Maybe we should question why they're traveling. Why are they traveling to the Antarctica currently? Why are they buying all these underground facilities, these old missile silos?
Yeah.
I don't think we're questioning the right stuff, and we're sticking our heads into the sand. Maybe just because we feel like we don't have a way to control that, from a scientific way of altering it, and from a monetary way of being able to be one of those that are going to Antarctica or purchasing that underground silo. So knowing that knowledge, I don't know if it's good or bad. But personally, I would want to know.
How do you place an order for seeds from the Doomsday Vault?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you know what? What was the Ark? What was the Ark? A DNA sampling of all the creatures. Is that what's going down with them right now to the Antarctica? I mean, you've got to be open-minded to what you're reading. It doesn't have to be a literal translation. It could be figurative.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing that I think is lost frequently, especially whenever it comes to biblical references, things like that. I think people get, and don't get me wrong, people, there is faith, but there is also story woven into that faith. There is also history woven into that. To look at the story of creation in and of itself, in any version of the Bible, it says story of creation 1, story of creation 2. There are two there that are very similar but different. And that book called Genesis keeps on going and goes through Noah and stuff like that. And when you take it, not necessarily literally, but contextually, and you say, like James is, where, Noah didn't take an animal from every known place in the world. Noah hadn't been every known place in the world, but he did it in the world that he lived in. So if he went around and got a DNA sample of all the critters, male and female, in his region, it's a little bit more believable. And even to carry something like that, for the Ark to be transliterated into a DNA vault, I don't think is beyond the realm of capacity. And I don't think that destroys any religious paradigm. Pretty sure it doesn't. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Speaking of Carlos Cedillo, welcome, Carlos Cedillo. I see you on the Facebook feed over here. Our Mayan prophecy gentleman has just joined us. So, James, as we're talking about civilizations like the Maya, things like that, what were some of it? Because so many civilizations were predicated on, or not necessarily predicated, but that had a deep following for the planet Venus. And as we talk about the Bible right now, it just dawned on me, which is why my brain just kind of rabbit holed on the planet Venus. But there's a large reference to the planet Venus, which is often taken as Lucifer in the New Testament, things like that. But Venus in and of itself is predominantly in numerous ancient cultures. Why is that?
And that's my whole point, and kind of that knowledge that I'm trying to pass on through the fictional books is what is the truth in it, or in the lectures, is Venus affected so many cultures and civilizations around the world. And when you look at the symbolisms that were used, you look at the codices, like the Codex de Bourgeois, or you listen to or you read the Popol Vuh, and I hope I get it right. I think they said it was ruin and destruction. The sea was piled up. It was a great inundation. People were drowned in a sticky substance raining from the sky. The face of the earth grew dark, and the gloomy rain endured days and nights. And then there was a great din of fire above their heads. The entire population of the land was annihilated. I'm pretty sure that was how it goes. But the Maya, the Mesoamerican people, seem to have the best historical data kept for us. And it's interesting that the few codices that are left, from so much destruction that the Spaniards did, much of it talks about Venus. And when you look at what you're literally looking at in the pages, there looks to be a battle going on between forces that represent Earth and forces that represent this other world. And you see a spear being plunged into Mother Earth, and the animals and the humans are running around, and there's chaos. And you have to think to yourself, what are they trying to represent, or what are they trying to pass on to those future generations? And then you go into other ancient cultures, and Venus gets a bad rap. You got to ask yourself why. You look in the petroglyphs, and you see certain events taking place that look to be worldwide. And we're talking about all over the world. In Ireland, I've been to Ireland, I've been to the Cairns, and you see the same things that you see in the southwest of the United States. I've been to northern Scotland, and their clava cairns have the same events taking place. You go from museum to museum, and you've kind of got to look and see that the symbols are so similar. And if you're looking at a same era, a same time era, what took place? What did humanity see taking place? What event took place that we have this cosmology built around it now? In astrology, sometimes people laugh when I say astrology to me is more important than astronomy, because our ancestors created astrology for a reason. They put planets in certain locations, gave it certain identities, because they're trying to point something out. And for people that believe in the Bible and Christianity, look at the Jesus. What did he talk in? He talked in parables. He was considered an Essene Jew, which was an extremist at that time, and they spoke in parables. And it was for multiple reasons. It was so that they could tell the story without being found out. They wanted the right people to understand them. That parable form can be seen in writing around the world in text. They knew that at the right time, our DNA that for those certain people would be activated when they saw something. When they saw that specific glyph, something would activate. Some of that lost technology buried deep within us in these biological computers that we are would be activated. And the Native Americans, we used to make so much fun of them. And if people would just take a moment to stop and listen, and don't listen literally, listen to what they're trying to tell you at a figurative sense, use different perceptions, different abilities, different senses to understand what they're trying to tell you. And at some point, I feel that if you're open-minded, that what it is embedded in each of us, that lost technology, that lost historical data will start to resonate. And if it happens as a collective, I think even the better, because maybe that's what it needs to do. Maybe that's what we are, and we just don't know that. We haven't gotten to that point yet in humanity to understand our full capacity.
How do you think that we as individuals can, I guess, really start to tap into that capacity, start to turn our attention toward that?
And it's hard to pinpoint that, because I think it's different for a lot of individuals. I think obviously for us to be open-minded is definitely the first step, maybe to start looking for that knowledge or that understanding in different places that we haven't before, to see what other cultures have tried to pass on or explain might be one of our best assets. Instead of trying to stick to just a Western philosophy and a Western culture and thought, maybe we need to start looking for those answers elsewhere.
I couldn't have said that better myself. It's absolutely the case that we need to start looking at the stories of history, the stories of these other cultures, not just their myth and folklore, but the history that we know, the spoken history that they have that goes beyond their myth and folklore, especially here in the American Southwest. There is such a rich tapestry of not just history, but really interesting stories of creatures, places like Skinwalker Ranch, and just sightings, technology, things like portals, which I would love to have you on the show at some point to talk specifically about portals and stargates throughout these cultures, because that's something that is spoken about in all of these cultures throughout mankind. And to know that specifically here in the American Southwest, there was a strong history of portals, time tunnels, things like that. Absolutely.
And, you pinned the tail right on the donkey, the petroglyphs for the Native Americans show so much more when you're open-minded, when you're willing to look through their eyes and not be so ethnocentric in your viewpoint, but allow yourself the opportunity to see the way they see. For them, it's just common knowledge, it's day-to-day understanding, and it's just a wonderful experience to spend time with them and to listen. I think that's just a lost art, is the ability to listen, just be quiet for a while and get that understanding and gain that knowledge. That and you know what, you've got to earn their trust to be able to do it. And if you're so lucky to do so, I highly suggest you sit down with them and you just listen, and you'd be amazed. They have this rich history of the star people, rich history of what they call the little people, and then you take that around the world and you see that it's also in it's parts of other cultures and civilizations. And we discussed this again right on that 40th parallel, the line of latitude where Skinwalker Ranch in the Uintah Basin falls. You know, you're talking about Sardinia, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Armenia, northern Iran. So much is similar in the artifacts, in the glyphs, in the language. But again, that's a whole nother discussion and topic. Cover at a future date.
Yeah, that is an episode in and of itself to just talk about that latitude, everything on it, the ties between those cultures. Like we were saying earlier, when you're talking about artifacts from the Middle East, artifacts with Middle Eastern writing being found in the American Southeast, that date from those pre-biblical times. It's mind-numbing to think about, much less to think about their origin there. And just to kind of tie these two worlds together, for those of you who can't just accept things from a native point of view and this point of view of wisdom, Matthew 18:3, everybody. Truly I say to you, unless you in turn become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of God. And the interpretation of that would be, have the mind of a child, have the faith of a child. Be willing to accept these things. Be willing to accept them. There's a reason why the Native Americans, like you're saying in the Southwest, the Hopi, things like that are like, yeah, like, why wouldn't you believe that? Like, to them, like you were saying, James, it's commonplace.
Common knowledge day to day.
Yeah, like why don't you understand this? Like, this is something that we deal with all the time. We just accept it being there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to, like I said, if you come at it like a child, and it doesn't mean like be stupid about it. It means just accept it. Like if you tell a child what something is, until they learn otherwise and explore otherwise, that will be what they believe it is. And if you come at everything with that explorative mind of a child, to want to know despite what it does to your paradigm, to your way of thinking, to want to know, to want to explore, to go back to that question that Del Miller posed earlier, what do we do to bring about this curiosity again? It is that want to explore. It's that want to know. It's that want to climb the mountain because the mountain's there. And yeah, we really do have to invigorate that in our society again, which, like, that's a lot of why I started this show, James, was to reinvigorate these conversations in society. They aren't comfortable conversations to have. To say that what we know as science may be myth in and of itself.
Yep, and that's an excellent point.
And we have to be willing to have that conversation. We have to be willing to put forth that, and note, folks, I use this word all the time. We put forth that hypothesis. Because, yeah, we have to use the scientific theory. We have to, and even when you use the scientific theory and put forth the hypothesis on these things, the theory still stands up. And it's interesting that when you start moving through the scientific process with some of these things, the process starts breaking down, James. And that's where we get stymied is, well, wait a minute, this process that we've trusted so long now suddenly tells us that something is like, that a society existed more than 10,000 years ago. What normally
exactly?
What normally comes of a society that starts thinking that way? That just starts not thinking, I guess.
Yeah, I think once we get to that point once where advancements start taking place, and people think, are limited in thinking when I say advancement to technology, and it's not just technology. I think it's an inner discovery as to, what the human body is, what humanity is. Are we not just an individual, but are we also a collective together? And maybe our learning, maybe I'm sounding philosophical in this, but it is. There's a philosophical engagement, for the soul, or, whatever you consider the soul to be. And you got to think of this body. It's a biological computer where we're technology in and of ourselves.
Yeah.
And, what can we do with it once we become open-minded as an individual and as a race, as a species? And at that point, I think huge advancements in every aspect will start taking place. And if there's other species and other beings, be that extraterrestrial, interdimensional, that are much older than the human race, at some point they had that advancement based upon coming together as an individual and as a collective. And that's where we need to go in order to get there.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially when talking about advancement beyond societal means, getting to the point of I guess, like you said, and thank you for getting philosophic. I no longer have an applause cue on my stuff, but I almost applaud. I reached for it, and it was like, oh man, I don't have the applause cue anymore. But yeah, not enough people are willing to get philosophic, and that's exactly what this show is for. Is to have those tough discussions. Like, you want to know what happened to our society? We stopped talking about religion and politics and economics and philosophy and science and things like that over a beer. And just having a beer and be willing to hear somebody's point of view and go, wow, that's interesting. Not trying to change a paradigm. Not trying to, prove somebody wrong or prove yourself right. But literally being open-minded enough to accept what somebody believes for what they believe and leaving it at that. And that's why I wanted to have you on, James, was because, like I said in my initial contact with you, I'm so glad to see so many of the eyes of society turning toward this topic, turning toward the idea. And I'm not just talking ancient aliens, folks, things like that. Like, yeah, sure, Giorgio Tsoukalos has done a lot for the movement. Okay. There have been people that have been working for years and years and years and years on these topics, on topics of lost civilizations, and in doing this research, people like James Keenan, who have been out there, hands in the dirt, digging, finding things that, hey, this just don't jibe, and then suddenly it's whisked away from them, and it's not to be found in, it's being examined by top men, and that's literally the case. Where somebody else's work has come along, challenged the status quo of what people have gotten millions of dollars in grants to go study, and when that is suddenly just chopped at the knees and disproven, what are you going to do except for try to bury that? Except for try to get rid of that? Yeah. It happens all over the place. Go ask a graduate student in science how many of their projects get sabotaged by classmates, and that's just for a grade. That's not to write a scholarly paper and get published, or end up on a panel internationally, something like that. So the fact that the status quo, I think, is questioned is important. The fact that we hypothesize things outside of the realm of the norm, I think, is important. And I want to thank you not only for thinking it's important enough to research, James, but for coming on our show and taking the time to discuss this research and discuss these topics openly with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. No, most definitely. I look forward to numerous more episodes with you. I also look forward to getting your book. If you go to dudesandbeer.com, everybody, to the store, dudesandbeer.com/store, right at the top of the page are the 4 most recent books. Or no, I guess not. Shoplifting in a Paranormal Zone was pretty early in your series, actually. But he's got numerous books. There are 4 of them there. Click any of them and it will take you directly to his store with all of his stuff. And go on by, support him. Check out the books. I'm getting my copy coming up of Dark Shadows and Catastrophe, which is the preamble to the book he was referencing earlier, 10/22/2036, which is kind of a science fiction story based on these hypotheses that we've been talking about this evening. And
right.
Wow, it just, once again, James, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I know you're in the midst of writing new stuff. We'd love to have you on to talk about that whenever it comes about. Do make sure to keep in touch with us.
I will. Absolutely. Thank you.
Fantastic. Please do hold the line while we close things out. While you're online checking out all of the great stuff by James Keenan, make sure to stop on by dudesandbeer.com. That is where you can find the episodes. That's where you can find the Knowledge Vault. That's where you can find everything that Dudes and Beer does, including links to our social media. Come by, follow us, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Stop by, like us, review us. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, if you can't be good at it. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Podcast. To listen to our audio streams or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for Android and iDevices, available on Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors and other podcasts on this network, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.